What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 60 of Value Town. I'm ChanManV, joined today by Reynad, Noxious, and Frodan. How's everybody doing today? Ray, you're still in Pac South, right? Or down somewhere, not
right
your house.
Yeah, PAX South happened in San Antonio, and I drove down to, or up to Austin. I drove in a direction to Austin. It took like an hour and a half.
East, yeah. Yeah.
Now I'm staying at Reckful's place for a few days, just hanging out and stuff.
Reckful and Reynad in the town on 6th Street. It's a pretty good dynamic duo there. Noxious, how you doing, man?
Pretty good. I mean, I'm just done streaming, so as usual, always just segueing directly into the stream.
Yeah, man. Awesome. And Frodan, who's our guest today.
Yo.
Yeah.
Like the little Hearthstone stones in the background. That's cool.
Yeah, man, I had to clean my room a lot.
Yeah, dude.
Really?
And I was in meetings all day this morning, so screw you. I don't want to spend my mornings cleaning. It's not what I'm supposed to be doing in life.
The life of working at home, man. That's what it's always like, right?
That's right. No, it's overdue. It's overdue. So.
All right. Well, we've got a topic-packed show today, which was funny because it wasn't planned that way originally. Me and Noxious were talking maybe like 3 days ago, and then like a lot of stuff happened in the last 48 hours. So we're going to be kicking things off with talking about the standard game format that was announced just over a day ago from Blizzard. And then some new events that are upcoming that were announced since our last show. Some player transaction, particularly revolving around Firebat. And then we're going to be taking some of your questions, as always, in Q&A. And you can post your questions to ValueTownGG on Twitter. Okay, so let's talk about the big announcement that Blizzard made yesterday morning. Announced a new game format, Standard, which is the first game format that's going to be essentially eliminating some cards from the set, or at least having a game format that retires some of the cards. Lots of people talking about it in the community right now, and there's a lot of things to talk about, so I kind of wanted to maybe focus on a few things just to get started. I figured we would take a look at it, like what these changes mean kind of generally for casual new players, and then we'll take a look at it from the standpoint of competitive and pre-existing players. So let's talk about this change for, again, for new players, casual players, and Noxious, I'll have you kick things off. Like, how do you think this change will affect new players, and, is it good, is it bad?
I think it's good. It's obviously good. I mean, they know what, like, if we're talking about a brand new player, he knows where to go right off the bat, as opposed to trying to figure out what cards he needs and what, like, of the older stuff, he might never even encounter it. I don't know, I feel like when you're good into Hearthstone right now, there's so much stuff to even figure out. It can get pretty daunting, and a lot of the cards that you get that look cool end up being irrelevant, and it can be kind of difficult sometimes. I mean, when you look at the standard format, I think just the fact that the game forces you into getting that content and not the old stuff means that there's really no way for you to fall behind. I don't know. I feel like you're always up to date as a new player now. Although there will be like a constant flux of, I guess, money or gold or whatever time you have to put into the game. That hasn't really changed, really. I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, Frodan, what's your thoughts? I mean, I know you've talked a little bit about just the barrier to entry kind of feeling that a lot of players have these days trying to get into Hearthstone.
Yeah, I mean, this is really good for a lot of reasons. The first is that Hearthstone I think Ben Brode even admitted that Hearthstone will die very quickly in terms of the interest level, not like the gameplay itself or the fan base itself, but it would have died very quickly off if they didn't do anything like this, because it's something that Reynad's mentioned hundreds of times by now, that the bigger the card pool and the more increased like expansions come out, the more refined deck lists become and the less impact they have. I mean, if TGT came out as the first expansion outside of the core and classic set, then you probably see a lot more dramatic impact of TGT, and people would be complaining way less. And who knows, maybe GVG comes out and then people would be only saying we played with like 3 cards there, So it's all a matter of perspective of limiting the card pool actually gives us more diverse options. It's been discussed many times. The big problem that people are always talking about right now, because unsurprisingly, in the internet world, even though something good happens, people complain.
They're mad. Yeah, I'm so surprised by that, man.
So,
I don't get it.
Of course.
But I get it, because what really sucks is if you started playing anywhere between 4 to 5 months ago, and if you start
Yeah,
in
yeah,
next
which-
month, because they said spring 2016, but it's still winter, so we're gonna have like a month and a half, 2 months of limbo. So for this 6 month period, it really sucks to be a player in Hearthstone because you don't really have the decks to compete if you really want to go for it. You're also getting bullied a lot by ladder because Mysterious Challenger, all these other decks still exist.
Yep.
And whether or not it's the strongest deck doesn't really matter. The whole point is that people are playing it a lot and it's being oppressive, at least the public opinion.
about that.
So it's still there, and that's the kind of awkward period where I don't know how many players will sign up, but if the growth rate continues, it's anywhere between a few million players that sign up. It's just kind of sucks for them. But it's also one of those things where I think you sacrifice the greater good, or sacrifice for the greater good.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay.
Reynad, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a change that had to happen. I think they did it in pretty much the best way possible, and yeah, I'm happy to see it. And most importantly, like relative to like the ways they're considering doing it, I'm happy how much faster this is. Like this is happening very quickly, which is like very much needed. We have to wait one season, a few months or whatever for the expansion, and then it's good to go. So yeah, I'm really excited for that, honestly. And the multiple like formats in Magic is one of my favorite parts of the game. Actually, you'd have a tournament like every weekend, and the major tournaments like the Grand Prix of the Pro Tours, they would kind of cycle formats. So you'd play like some tournament in Standard, some tournament in Legacy, Extended back when there were good formats, and you kind of cycle through all of these and Sealed. Yeah, so that was like really fun to learn multiple formats because all of them require like different skill sets, and yeah, just it makes the more holistic, like well-rounded players come out on top more often, I think.
Yeah.
Let it be known that Reynad liked the card game once upon a time.
Yeah, there used to be a time where I mean, actually, I kind of have to agree with the extended thing, but I feel like maybe if they run tournaments, like I don't know how much of like official support there will be for Wild, but I'm just happy that it's there because there can be official support and maybe forcing the best players to diversify, which is cool.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about so let's kind of go now, switch kind of frames into competitive players and pre-existing players where we can talk about Wild. So I think these are the players, or this is the group of people who I think have some complaints about the change, because these are the folks that have invested money into things like GVG and Nax, and those things are going to be removed soon. And not everybody are like us who have like every single card, so we don't really care that much, if some of the old cards go away because we're so excited about new cards. What do you think right now? With the reaction from a lot of people here. Ray, I'll start with you on this one.
The reaction about what?
Just reaction from people who have some of the GVG cards and the Nax cards, and feel like with the focus being so much on Standard that like all this investment is just going to go out the window. And I might not be one of those guys that just are keeping up like every single expansion. So it kind of it just feels bad that I guess their play experience will be altered, different than everybody else.
I mean, they still queue ladder the same way. They still get the same rewards. They still get the same rank. If they want to play wild mode, it's all still there. I really think they did a good job of making it so that if you are one of those players that prefers to not just play with the newest, or to just play like classic Hearthstone, and you can still do that exactly what you've been doing before. I think it was like a pretty elegant solution that the way that they have two separate ladders basically, and I think it's a great way to do it, to be honest. So yeah, I don't really see how the play experience would change for anybody except for the very hardcore players who will be playing more Standard events and more getting like BlizzCon points by grinding for top 100 legend, things like that. And, like all of the players, the cards. So I don't think it really affects them in a bad way at all.
Okay, Nox.
You know what blows my mind, ChanMan?
Yeah.
When people are like really upset that Wild has its own separation of stuff,
Right.
and then they're always like, Blizzard wants us to be buying the new expansion.
Dude.
And this is their way to make
Tinfoil.
money. And
Tinfoil hats.
I'm just like, well, first of all, if it's Wild, you're still buying the new content.
Yeah.
Like that's what absolutely blows my mind, because it's like
Yeah.
nothing changes. And the second of it is that Blizzard had no incentive at all to even care about Wild. They could have just tossed it into a casual mode. In fact, when they asked us for feedback, this was the original suggestion. We're like, well, why not just have a if you were to do a rotation, why not just put it as ranked and then just put everything into casual mode and then just like have it unranked, so you can kind of like have an actual casual mode where you can play every single card. So that was the suggestion, and they even went a step further and said we'll even provide you rank rewards. So for people who feel like they have a collection over time, that they're not completely like losing half of it, they still can earn something from it and continue to collect. So like Blizzard even went a step beyond that.
I feel like maybe it's just really the irrelevance, right? Like they feel like casual is irrelevant, so if we just give them casual, they're gonna be pissed because they get told that all your collection is now completely obsolete. Whereas if you give you something out of it for the long term, plus also I feel like vintage and Magic is very much alive, even though it's kind of hard to find players who have necessarily the best collections. But just like full on open Magic is really fun. And I think for Hearthstone, that's also going to be fun. Like I'm surprised people are not happy, because the fact that also the cards get rotated out of the shop means that whatever you got up until this point is worth quote unquote more once the rotation comes up. Although that might change in the future, I don't know.
Yeah, let's talk about that. That's another thing that came up, was that whenever these cards get retired, or these sets get retired, the adventures and the expansion sets are not available in the shop, right? A lot of people would still like to see that, or at least some people would still like to see that. What are your thoughts on that, Frodan?
I think as far as I remember, this is a game UI design decision. There's a lot of things that actually go into it that people don't talk about, and it's not extremely obvious. The first example that everyone always brings up is too confusing for new players, which is a classic meme, by the way.
Right.
10 out of 10, 8 out of 8. I hope it sticks around for a long time. But it's a packaged way to say that they don't want to overwhelm people with options, specifically players who aren't completely familiar with the interface. If you open up any game, for example, and you have 10 different booster packs, you're not exactly sure which one you want to buy. A lot of card games actually struggle with this kind of concept. So they want to simplify the decision-making process. If you have like 3 adventures, 4 adventures, 7 expansions that you have to kind of sift through, you're just gonna Google which one's the best, and you have a bunch of opinions, and sometimes that might just be too much work and some people to close it. This actually goes to matchmaking as well. Like, it's a pretty big decision that Blizzard split Wild and Ranked into actual play modes, because that also splits the player base. Might increase queue times, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, some people have mentioned that, but I don't know how legit that is of a concern.
Well, it's just something that you have to consider as a game designer or developer. So, I can understand why they do it. I actually really like that suggestion. I don't really usually take too much credence to people's opinions on suggestions of changes on the public forums when it's upvoted in mass. But this one's actually a pretty good one. Like, it's not that they're bad ideas; it's that a lot of them are impractical. It's like, why not just add deck slots like this, and then they put like a fancy thing, and I'm like, well, it may work on PC, not on mobile, etc. But in this case, if you just have like one thing dedicated to Wild, and it's a bunch of packs that have all the old adventures and all the old expansions, that I think actually might be a pretty good suggestion. And Blizzard's is open to looking at that kind of stuff, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're actually accounting for it.
Ray, I mean, you've always been the guy who's collected all the golden cards, just for completeness sake, and that sort of. And there's a few people that I know, like streamer-wise and stuff, that do that. From the standpoint of that, just completeness and collector, just feeling like it's a collector's thing, even though it's not really. They haven't really, made it into more of a collector's, like a TCG-like feeling, because there's no value in the cards. Are you still going to continue to collect all the cards, or at least you're going to keep them around? I know a lot of people are going to be dusting a lot of cards and things like that, but what are your thoughts on just that?
No, I mean, my goal is to just have a complete collection. Like, I think it's just cool to, since I was in the game since the very, very early stages. I have a chance to get every card back, every gold card, I mean, I do that.
Uh-oh.
Losing Reynad.
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me now? Testing 1 2.
Yeah, we can hear you, but
Hello?
Okay, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, I was going to say, I'm still going to collect all the cards, basically.
Okay.
I want to get a complete collection. It's cool to be able to do that since we're in Hearthstone since the beginning, so.
Noxious, how do you feel about that? Just collecting the cards. I think you do too. Right?
I mean, I do a lot of it too. Like, I just try to get all the goldens. The problem is, I feel like you get so few of them anyway from card packs that it doesn't really matter whether you have to craft them through the dust that you disenchanted the new packs or the old ones.
Yeah, that's true.
So as far as I'm concerned, as long as the ratio of dust to card doesn't really change for the older stuff, then it doesn't matter. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I feel like it's not really going to change too much for collector's sake since they're still craftable.
Yeah.
It's also kind of like a big deal that they chose to strike GVG as well.
Yeah.
That wasn't
Yeah.
that wasn't really something that wasn't so set in stone. I think when originally they were talking to us, they were thinking about just taking out Nex Rammus just by itself.
Wow.
So it's like, because if you think about it, Nex is still kind of a big deal. You know, Death Spite being gone really hurts Warrior. Mad Scientist
Yeah,
being gone.
Zombie,
Sludge
yeah.
Belcher, Death Lords, Zombie Chows, Haunted Creepers. You know, there's there's a
Belcher.
lot of cards in Nex Rammus that had a huge impact, maybe to the point where power level was immediately increased that way. And they thought GVG was just a huge amount of the card pool, because I mean, even in chat saying it, the card pool is still kind of really small if you think about classic and basics, especially if they're nerfing cards based off what they were implying. So
Yeah.
if you have like very few cards, it also is the opposite extreme. Like everything is not really diverse because everybody has the same cards. So I think the fact that they're trying to eliminate GVG means that they have a lot of holes to fill, like a lot of holes to fill. And I'm sad because some of my favorite cards were in GVG around that time. I've said it on Twitter. Echo of Medivh is like one of the most interesting cards in the game, in my opinion, and that card single-handedly gave life to a bunch of mage archetypes. And now it's gone. So I'm
Yeah.
pretty
Well,
sad.
I mean,
What about Hobgoblin, man?
hey man, those decks were fun too, man.
Hobgoblin can die in a fire from the Tavern Brawl. Man,
God.
that card was so nuts. Oh my god, I wanted to kill myself every time it got played.
So just, I guess, touching on the last thing with the whole wild versus standard thing. I think maybe one of the things that did kind of rub some folks the wrong way with wild is a little bit of how they presented it, because there is a ladder, which is totally cool, and I mean that kind of presumes that they want you to care about wild, and give you at least something to work for. But then they don't like feature, I guess, the top 100, like at the end of the season. And, there's like this whole other thing where, competitive is going to be standard and all these other things where it's just like, okay, there's no emphasis on wild. Do you think they should have done a little bit more just to, to frame it a little bit differently in terms of wild instead of just having the ladder?
I think so. Not
Yeah.
make it seem as casual as
Yeah.
Because the way people look at it, they're like, "Oh, this is the new casual, and nobody's gonna care about it." Even though you do get rewards and you do get to stroke your EP if you climb pretty high, given that it's also gonna be a lot. I don't want to say tougher, but I feel like that format is gonna be so all over the place. I guess wild is the right term in this case, because over time, that like the more cards
No.
get added to standard.
Wild is a description. It's not.
The more
It shouldn't be the name of the
stuff,
mode.
man.
That's true. I don't agree with the
So-
name of it
God.
either.
That person deserves to be fired.
I know. What should it be called? Legacy?
Yeah, why not?
Oh,
Actually,
God.
legacy, I
Not
think.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Reynad,
I thought that name was weird.
Reynad, do you see any events being like? Do you see a lot of maybe like big events or maybe just brands that would I guess define themselves as a wild type of event starting to pop up in the community? Versus
Yeah, I mean,
just
we'll
a standard?
definitely run some big ones. It's
Okay, cool.
when I played Magic a lot of the time, like one of the things that's criminally underrated in that game is like every format that's not standard, because standard is kind of like represents 90% of play that happens in that game, which is not healthy, I don't think. And they tried to introduce a new format that they pushed really hard called modern, but they handled that really badly, in my opinion. So like the best formats ended up being these like two older formats where you can play with like all the cards, and they had very little support. And the very few third-party tournaments that did happen for those got a lot of attention. People loved them. They had communities dedicated to only playing that format. They have their own memes and everything. It's it's cool. Like, so I think
It's like Project M.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like Project M. So I think that those types of formats definitely will happen. It was like when we were giving like Blizzard feedback, that was my number one issue was like, I want to make sure that Wild gets as much support as possible, and I'm really glad that they did more than just make it casual. Like, I'm actually really happy with the way they did the final solution.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that's concealed a lot. Like, one thing I actually really do wish Blizzard would do more. I mean, on top of the list of growing Christmas like wishes, right? But
Yeah,
one
endless.
of them was
Sure.
Periodically they used to release like a bunch of statistics and infographics on stuff
Yeah.
like
The coin.
how
that's
like
right.
random
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
like how many leper gnomes were killed or something, and then like how many people play this deck or this kind of stuff. And that like those kinds of statistics, I can understand why they want to keep under wraps. First of all, they're just kind of like just talking points, and second of all, they might actually use that information against them. But one thing that's also really interesting to me is how many people actually play like arena versus ranked, or even just ranked versus casual. And I asked even a Blizzard dev, and they wouldn't tell me the real numbers because they want to keep that internally. But it's kind of similar to what Reynad was saying. I think the quote that I got was it's in the double digits of percentages that people play arena. So I was like, why do you have to quantify it? It's like 90%. I assumed it was in double digits. So it's
double
like,
digits.
It's based off the way he
helpful,
even
man.
quantified that. It sounded as if it was like in the low 15 to 20, 30. I'm just completely speculating. I don't know anything about it, but it's just like
That's funny anyway, though. But
it's like the overwhelming majority care about ranked constructed mode. And then, a subsection also care about Tavern Brawl since it recently released. This is a question I asked months ago, so it could have completely changed since Tavern Brawl has continued to develop. Even before the Mechazod Tavern Brawl. So I think Tavern Brawl has grown considerably in popularity since then. I'm not sure.
That's kind of interesting because I've always thought of Tavern Brawl as just more of, it would overlap with the other two. Like you're either in the team, constructed or the team, arena bucket, and then the Tavern Brawl would kind of overlap with a little bit, or the casual players would come into it.
Yeah.
So that's
I mean,
kind of interesting.
my wife
the Tavern
just
Brawl
plays
itself.
Tavern Brawl all day.
Yeah.
That's all she plays. Like she doesn't play Hearthstone unless Tavern Ball's up. So
Oh, that's cool.
I mean, that's
man.
like a segment of that population, for instance, that probably doesn't care too much.
Yeah, mission accomplished, right? With
Yeah,
Tavern
done and
Brawl.
done.
That's the,
Yeah. But I mean, they still do care about arena. Like, they definitely do. First, they balance even sometimes around that, and people don't really see it as obviously until it's pointed out. Like, Obsidian Destroyer and Fierce Monkey, their rarities are not a coincidence at all. Like, they're specifically trying to help classes like Warrior and probably Hunter, and I think Shaman's also a bottom 3 class. So.
That's Sea Reaver, man. That was a good idea.
all right, you're
Magnetor
gonna,
Alpha.
But you get the idea. Like League of Explorers,
yeah.
they really tried to help Warrior in Arena. So I'm sure
They
there's
did.
going to be more deliberate stuff. I actually am really curious why they don't have an Arena ranking at all. I'm sure that would.
that
motivate
needs to come
people
out too.
And then even Arena rewards. End of the season is like, you got 12 wins. Here's like another free pack. I mean, there's probably economics behind it, but
Hey,
I ideally would like to.
I want to see who
Arena.
the top players are. We kind of heard these rankings behind the scenes and that sort of thing, but why not, right? Why not just show top 100 players?
The thing about info like that, and the point Frodan mentioned about showing infographics and stuff is, like, a lot of people don't know this, but it's actually very difficult and time consuming for Blizzard to pull those kinds of stats. Because you have to do it individually, like per player and stuff. The system even that they have isn't great for doing it, and it's the biggest reason they're making the API that they talk about, which it's something people don't mention too often, but it's going to be a huge deal in the type of third-party content you see. So once that API is finished, it'll be easier for Blizzard to track stats on, like, what decks are people playing in general and what rank, like, who has the highest arena win percentage. All these things will be done by wonderful community websites like tempestrum.com.
Well
In which case, you'll probably have a
done.
deck tracker by then.
Exactly.
That can, help spot
Which you
leads.
downloaded it.
Well, I can't wait for the API. Like, analytics has always been kind of an interest
Like 6
of mine.
months, man. Right?
So
6 months.
six
about.
6 months. Okay, all right.
Yeah, they promised it about, like they said,
They
they're working
promised
on
it 6 months ago. It's 6 months ago.
I remember
Yeah.
that because, like, I was talking to some of the guys who were doing some development on another website, and they said, "Yeah, we're just waiting on the API to do that project," and the project never came to life because the API never showed up. So that was pretty sad.
Man, if you're depending on that, wow, that's
I mean, they
pretty
wanted to
risky
wait
to do
because they
that.
were told. They were
Right.
told.
right.
Anyway, it was funny.
Okay, well, let's kind of get into the meat of some things and talk about what cards are going to be gone and
Gilbot.
what we think what we think is going to happen, or who looks like they're getting the shit in the stick even before we see what they're going to be adding. So let's take a look at the cards, or at least notable cards that are going to be taken away here in GVG and Naxxramas. Lots of lots of very important cards to the metagame right now. Thoughts on, I guess, the cards that will have the most impact just being removed for a particular class or just generally? Reynad, I'll have you start with it.
I mean, I could go down a long list of them, right? But I actually
Yeah.
don't like having conversations that way because
Okay,
once it gets around to the point where the rotation actually does happen, like, we spent all this time talking about, like, how much of a big deal it is to lose Sludge Belcher, but when the rotation happens, we're not playing with Sludge Belcher. Nobody's thinking about Sludge Belcher. The better conversation to have is what cards we'll start to see more play from a set like TGT, given that a lot of their current replacements are going away, right? So
Okay, sure. Yeah.
yeah. So I think cards like basically we lose a ton of broken 2-drops. That's a big deal, right? They're either nerfing Knife Juggler or I'm not playing the game again.
Yeah.
We're losing
He said it.
Mad Scientist. Yep.
Oh man.
Ending the Hearthstone division of Tempo. We're gonna be 100% like Heroes of the Storm and Smash Bros or something.
I like that.
We'll finally go in on that tiki hut on the beach and sell smoothies, right, Reynad?
One day.
That's a nice peaceful life.
24 hours.
One day.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Going
basically
half.
like it's like the 2-drops go away, right? So I actually think the kinds of cards that we'll start seeing way more of are things like Garrison Commander.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He still likes Garrison better. Yeah. Okay.
Really? Like so?
I love
so
it.
hero
I
power.
just remember
Hero power type of
Reynad
things?
rated that card pretty highly, and I was like,
It
It
is.
wasn't my top
It's
5, man.
nuts.
It wasn't my top 5. The top 5. I'm actually surprised it just never worked, but that's because the rest of the 2-drops just sucked.
If you were to rank like the top 10 most overpowered, like by the numbers cards in the game, like 8 of them are 2-drops or something. It's disgusting. So like once we lose all those, that's a very, very big deal. It completely changes how the game plays out. So yeah, I think like a lot of the Inspire mechanic cards are going to become huge. Obviously, whatever the main mechanic in the new expansion coming out is going to be massive, and you'll really start to see these like themes from the set, whether that's like Mech from GVG or Inspire from TGT. You'll see those kinds of themes making multiple tier 1 decks the way that they were intended to, and that's like the biggest consequence of limiting the card pool is those types of mechanics, and just cool interactive games are. They just happen more often. So, yeah, that's what I expect to see. The core set cards, it's really going to depend like what they nerf, obviously. But I mean, that's an impossible
Yeah,
conversation.
it could be anything right now.
Yeah.
Right? They just said they're definitely reviewing all of them.
Yeah.
And I think everybody in the community expects a lot of changes. So I think that's a huge part of this thing too.
Right.
So
Yeah,
we'll
like,
have to see
that's the
that.
question. Like, how many cards will be changed? Because sometimes it's just about addressing. Like we were talking about this. I was talking with Just Saiyan a bit earlier. I was mentioning how, like, talking about the aggro shaman and how I thought that thing was gonna just break the world.
Right.
And the thing is, like, Doomhammer, on its own as a kind of classic / core, really is an insane card. So one of the ways to fix it, and that's the thing, like they might never
What? You want to
choose
nerf
to touch those
Doomhammer?
cards. Well, I mean,
Oh,
like you
God.
change
Nerf
Rockbiter,
Shaman.
you change Rockbiter to where it can't touch you, man.
Noxious.
Yeah.
No, I'm not
well, his
mocking.
No, but I mean, like,
I
there's
think
no
Noxious
Belcher,
is
there's no
point.
heal bot, dude. You just go face. Like, how the hell do you stop that? I don't know, man.
Well, I think Noxious's point is that, like, if you look
Yeah.
at least just looking at the cards, right? Shaman just lost Crackle, but if you look at that aggro Shaman, it didn't lose much, and
That's
then
the
like
point,
you,
yeah.
you see a lot of things that were to prevent that type of deck. being
Frodan's
lost.
like
Yeah.
completely out.
I think that's his point.
I
Yeah.
was thinking the long list of, obviously Druid combo needs
No,
to be
no.
checked.
But like, I'm just
Yeah,
looking at
okay,
aggro
okay.
shaman as a problem thing because they're losing nothing and we're losing all the healing /
Right.
mitigation tools. But we have to get new shit, right? Like coming around with the new expansion.
Right.
Like if they print like I don't know Belcher's little brother and it's like 2/5 that spawns a 0/1 for 4 mana, then that might work to I guess stem the flow. But
Yeah, I mean,
Druid being.
I mean,
enemy
like,
number
we
one.
can even
Yeah.
talk about list of cards that we'd like
Yeah,
to be
sure.
nerfed. That's pretty cool. But Doomhammer is not one of them on my
no,
list.
not at all.
I would prioritize it just because I think it's a little bit iconic. Like I understand completely the idea why Blizzard wants to keep like the identity of Hearthstone in a lot of ways, because if you completely strip down a lot of what the existing cards are, then other than just the cosmetics and the hero power, there's really no diversity, or there's no like clear diversity between each class. So I like the idea of like having a core set. Something that Kibler brought up too in his video, that he wants to keep like less cards, not the classic and basic, because he's really afraid of like Alex Straza and BGH. Even Silence to a certain degree really makes.
Yeah, that bothers me. The owls,
think
like the owls
those are
this
getting
world,
changed.
annoy me.
Yeah, but it's just about how many are being changed, what should be changed. I mean, should
bigger
even
problem-
Harrison Jones stay the way he should? That's a card that I like. The more I always see Harrison, I'm just like, this card's nuts. But like what it can accomplish in terms of like what it wins or how it just blows out games.
Yeah.
Cards like
there's a
Kazan
lot-
Mystic will get rotated out, but if Harrison sticks around, it's going to be around forever.
Ray, yeah, you got
Yeah, I think a lot of people are like really concerned about individual, like the power level of individual cards and like how strong. The only combo people are even thinking about is like Druid combo
Yeah.
being removed. The bigger problem is just archetypes. Like if there's an archetype that's self-contained, like some kind of deck that you can just build all the time that's just in the classic set that
Yep.
pushes other decks out of the metagame, that's unhealthy. So like the more important nerfs are like Mountain Giant, Molten Giant.
yes.
Like
Twilight
because
Drake, yeah.
if you keep Handlock as just this deck that's always in the metagame, you push like half of the possible mid-range options out of the game. So things like that are even more important than like nerfing one Alexstrasza or whatever. Even though Alexstrasza definitely should be in consideration for nerfs.
Yeah, to
New
your
Warlock Hero Power, summon a 2/1 Imp.
I mean, when we've seen the same
here we
archetype,
change.
which you brought up Handlock and Druid, we've seen that archetype since the beginning. Like Handlock, it didn't look exactly the same, but it's pretty much designed the same way. It's been there since beta, and so is in Druid. I think when they introduced Savage it was a little bit later in the beta, but for the most part, it's looked very, very similar. So yeah, getting rid of those. I mean, just having decks that stick around for that long, I think there's definitely a big issue with that. So it's gonna be great to see the change there. In terms of something that you brought up, Ray, like earlier, where you were talking about Inspire mechanics and themes and things like that being introduced. One thing I see is like potentially problematic is, especially with the releases they've already had, is how they've introduced it and then how this kind of year cutoff will work. A good example is Mech, right? We're going to lose GVG. We're going to lose Shades. And there was a lot of Mech, minions and themes in that. And I mean, we're stuck with what? I think we counted them, Noxious. There was like maybe 7
Yeah,
mechs
but I mean,
or
it's
8
fun,
mechs
right?
left,
Yeah.
So they're going to have to be more aware of that type of release.
Go in the
right?
pirate bin.
Pirate bin,
Yeah, pretty much. But
yeah.
I think it's fine though. Like the fact that these cards can, like the thing, it gives them a bit of design space where they can make cards that aren't for standard necessarily. Because if you make just cards for standard, then you're also not giving any attention to the guys who might want some cool tools back in. They're playing that weird deck. Like when Beast tools for Druids rotate out, and there's some random dude playing Beast Druid on Wild for some reason. Then you don't give him any more Beast Druid tools, then what's he stuck with? Pretty much the same old stuff. So I don't know. I feel like having mechs come out, like this also gives them a good reason to push out really powerful pirates, let's say, which would be broken if all pirates exist. But as soon as it's just wild restricted, it won't affect the quote unquote competitive high, the meta game of the World Championship, let's say. So I don't know.
I mean,
I like it.
It's gonna be something different for other players. Like some players actually really like a very predictable and like slow shifting meta game,
right.
because they really like understanding exactly what range and variance they can account for. When the thing is constantly shifting every even few days because of the way information travels by Reynad building decks or Kalento building decks or Dog and Firebat, etc. building decks, like people just will immediately copy and start chain reacting. Based off that kind of very fast shifting meta, not everyone likes that kind of stuff. They don't play Hearthstone every day. They don't play Hearthstone every week. So they come back completely. Their decks that they spent a month and a half building for dust and collecting everything is just all of a sudden not good anymore. And they can't win a single game and finish a quest, which they can't get more gold and they can't do it. So some people like this kind of stale, we call it stale meta. Some people really like a very understandable, digestible meta that's just very slow shifting. To us, where we get bored if Reynad doesn't say anything for 30 seconds, that kind of generation, then we really like this kind of fresh meta that always evolves, and that's why people really look forward to it. And so that's why it's really good that Blizzard split it again, just to kind of pat them on the back one more time before we can move on. So.
No, you're absolutely right about that. I mean, the biggest issue is like investing into a deck and then having it like become bad within a few weeks, and you really. Yeah, you feel kind of robbed in that regard. That's definitely a drawback of fast-moving metagames. On the bright side, if anybody's ever like doesn't play for a week and they come back and they have like no idea what's good and they're super confused, I have heard of a few third-party tools that can help them get up to date on maybe like a tier
Meta
list
snapshot or something. Yeah. Where's that?
Awesome.
I think it's at tempstorm.com, man.
Looks like a pretty small
good
website.
stuff. Sell out.
Bought this hoodie there too. That's why I'm the best
By
dressed
the way,
person
by the
on
way,
this
by the
podcast.
way,
That's it.
this
We could-
around this time last year was when Magic gave me.
Oh, God.
Oh, we gotta bring Magic.
Light
The
a,
dream.
light a candle.
A moment of silence.
Let it die.
Silence.
I will eat a
Oh my
piece of
God.
sushi on her behalf.
This is good.
Okay, deck slots. Okay, so I have to bring this up, right? Just deck slots and the way they're doing 18 deck slots. Is that enough? You guys happy with the elite? I'm just happy to get more deck slots. I don't actually even
I'm cool
care,
with that.
so
That's
I'm-
fine.
Yeah.
200, because then you end up never unmaking any. But 9 was too restrictive because you never have any room for keeping the ones that you really love and are going to go back to at some point. And sometimes I just want to have like 9 lists of the same deck with different decks. And then that means that the other spots are just taken completely. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit with the 9 slots, but I guess maybe one of the things too that might make it irrelevant is the fact that they're improving where you make the deck. So that might also make the extra deck slots less relevant, but it makes the 18 even seem even bigger in that case.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
Yeah, since you can access the collection from the play menu from the screenshots.
Yeah, I'm happy they did a global thing versus just one or the other.
Yeah.
Ray, what do you think? Just deck slots, just 18? Good?
Yeah, I actually don't think that words exist in the English language to properly express how little I care how many deck slots we have. Like it's an issue that's so blown out of proportion because Reddit just wants some kind of circle jerky meme to complain about. That it's like, who plays 9 decks at a time? I get that a lot of people build something and they don't like memorize every list. So for a lot of people, it's nice to have that. For me personally, it's like all my deck lists are just in my head all the time. I can just build things on the spot. So for me personally, it doesn't matter. But I get why a lot of people would care. 18 seems like should be fine, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Frodan? Oh boy, here we go. Here we
Out
go.
of context, sound hilarious. The whole 18 should be. I think deck slots in general. Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's an overblown issue. But it was supposed to be like a representation of a lot of things, like that. It's something that people feel like Blizzard moves like a glacier. It's like really slow on stuff. So they're just like, why isn't the idea that we can have more deck slots? Like one thing that I do agree on is why the hell do we only have 1 Brawl deck slot? Like that
Yeah.
pisses me off like crazy.
Yeah, that's
Like
true.
at least 2, just 2, like would
I
be
agree.
okay. But
You need
Yeah.
like 3 or 4.
oh my
I
god,
agree.
that rustles my jimmies. My god.
Yeah.
That's true. That's definitely true.
I have like a screenshot folder for my Brawl decks. It's so annoying. And like the thing is up not even like the entire week. So most of the time I don't get to reuse those, but still it's just
Yeah,
sad.
there's definitely the tools out there that people do use typically, like like Deck Tracker and things like that. Some of them haven't included Brawl yet, so you guys should start including it because those tools are really, really great for keeping track of your old decks. Let's see what else can we. I'm trying to think if I have any more things to talk about this from a competitive standpoint. Have they said anything yet? I'm not sure if I missed it or not, but have they said anything about, I guess, how they're gonna be lining up the release in the spring of this, all of this change with the first season of the Hearthstone World Championship? I mean, is there gonna be this moment where there's like, you're playing half of some, this current format and then half of the new format? Is there gonna be any of that? Is that gonna be an issue this season? Do you guys know, Frodan?
Well, my gut tells me they're not irresponsible enough to do that.
I like
But
the
they
word
also
choice
have-
there.
I just wasn't sure if I
Frodan.
missed
also
them
Well
saying
done.
twice in a row, nerfed right before BlizzCon. So
They have done that indeed. I was gonna
Right.
refer to that to just mention how much they might not care, but I guess this time around they might actually just get it right because it is
Yeah,
a really
I think
huge
so.
release as opposed to being kind of a small thing. So
yeah, I would assume that they probably one thing that Blizzard's doing a lot more now is embracing the idea of like public reveals, whether the TGT announcement or how they did at League of Explorers. I think in moving forward, they're going to try to find good opportunities to do cool announcements as well. Because Blackrock Mountain was like a really good learning experience where it wasn't very hyped and it was like dragons are cool, but it just kind of came out of nowhere and then all of a sudden just released and we had to wait for a long time. It was a mixture of a lot of like experimental stuff that they learned from. So I would assume, and again I don't really know anything, but my assumption and my guess theory is that we'll know something probably around the Winter Championships time. They'll probably, that's a really good platform to announce exactly when. It's like, oh, it's coming out next week, that kind of whole delivery opportunity is there. So
Yeah.
the timing feels right. So if I were to be, a gold stock investor in Hearthstone currency, I would probably start saving right around now. But
Betting in Hearthstone, Frodan?
don't
Man, are you...
don't sue me.
Okay, yeah, I think you're right about that too. It seems like it's lining up around the same time, so that would be really great if they ended up doing that. Yeah, I think overall I'm really excited about the change, and all just has there been any players that you guys have known of that just haven't been happy with this change? Like, I mean, extremely upset about the change.
Not that I know of. I know.
Yeah, it's
No, I don't think so. Dart mentioned something like the only way to fix Pilot Shredder and Doctor Boom was to delete them from the game, apparently. So that was a funny comment. But I mean, it's not as though Wild is not the game anymore. He didn't seem upset about it though. Like he didn't really seem to care. So I don't know of anybody who gives a single crap about it. On the pro scene, maybe Frodan does.
I mean, I kind of already said that in like a little bit in the very beginning of the show. The players who started 4 months ago to who start in about like anywhere between now and a month will be unhappy, but in the long term they'll understand. Now, if you're a player who's been playing since the beginning of beta and you're unhappy, or if you're a player that comes from other card games and you're unhappy, you should have your internet privileges taken away. You're probably also a person who types like fam and friends all the time. And, like, you're a person that probably types /s after every internet post you ever write.
And go to 4chan on a daily basis.
Delete your Twitter, delete your Facebook, Instagram, etc.
oh my god.
And
Well, that's mad.
It's just, there's not that many people that actually legitimately have a strong opposition to this in a way that's like, Blizzard is killing the game. Maybe they're unhappy, like, oh, I'm losing part of my collection's impact, or I invested into this much. But people who are like,